depending on where you're from. Boil up a pot. Take a seat by the half.
Maybe if you're not from a country and you're from the Feywild, it could be any time of day.
Oh, there, it cut out for me.
I just realised.
Well, good evening, everyone. How are you all doing?
Very good.
Good.
Yeah, good, thanks, man.
Those of you tuning in, welcome to another Player Roundtable. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. If you're watching live, give us a follow. Do what you got to do. Follow us on Instagram. Today, we're going to be discussing how to stay engaged with your D&D character over the course of a campaign. And I'm joined by some of my fellow players, some of my good friends. We've got Rupert, aka Zook the Druid of Air. We've got Mr. Michael Thomas, aka Dutch Grey, the pugilist barbarian. And we're also happy to have a recovering Tashi, who's our game master, our dungeon master, however you wish to call it. So those of you that are aware, we normally do our standard campaign on a Thursday. Unfortunately, Tashi was struck down by the COVID injection vaccination.
I'm the weakest among everyone, clearly.
Yes, those. But we're pleased to have you now and gonna deep delve this subject. I think it's gonna be sweet.
I wasn't prepared in any way for an intense session of ragtag tomfoolery in Xanthar City, but that will have to wait. I am very excited to carry on with that.
We also had an unsuccessful stream on Tuesday. I was trying to run it on my computer and failed abysmally, so I do apologise for that. But this has given us the opportunity to catch up in that regard. Yeah. So it's great. Maybe we just all go around and just say how we're doing and just remind the viewers of who your characters are and that sort of thing. I know it doesn't really relate to you, Tashi, but it's always worth doing. Just like a little brief introduction is always nice.
When you start,
Rupert? Me? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I play a rogue blood hunter, half elf, Dylan Gray. His brother is Dutch Grey, who's in my view, that's Mike, who's just beneath me.
Two to the right of you.
Yeah.
You're below me on my screen.
Okay, so it's reversed. It's all different. Yeah, it's all different.
Just go by the Twitch stream.
So, Mike, Dutch, we were two rapscallions brought up in the city. We were in with a criminal gang. We got out, made our way to this remote town called Ingmiri, which became our sort of safe haven. And then we defended the Ingmiri from various attacks, etc., etc. Dylan, unfortunately, was killed. He was brought back as a lycanthrope, and I multi-classed into Blood Hunter. And that sort of, lots of stuff's happened in between, but that's basically how the character development sort of went in very short terms. Someone else want to go?
That's the beginning part of the campaign, isn't it?
But there's too much to go into for much detail, but that's the sort of arc of the character, I suppose.
I think the big fight for Ingmiri was a big key point for loads of people's character progression.
Yeah.
Pivotal.
He died and got turned into a werewolf.
Ooh, your audio just got better. That's nice.
Kofin just died. That's where I decided that Dutch wanted to pull out his eye for Grumsh as an offering, and Tashi went full DM on it. I didn't even know he was going to do, and gave me the Eye of Grumsh.
We're getting ahead of ourselves here.
Mike, maybe you just want to do a little give us a little background of Dutch, just a little bit of we want to sort of know who he is.
So Dutch half-orc obviously was brother of Dylan Gray, turns out not so much. So they grew up together in the capital city of Xanthar as basically young thieves and street urchins. When they decided to leave, Dutch decided they needed some money and robbed rival gang members' house of money, which is where we're at in the story now. It's taken how many years to get for the plot point Dutch made by leaving Xanthar at the first thing of the campaign to now, when it's relevant. It's fucking
3 real years.
It's been years in real time. But yeah, so Dutch and Dylan's sort of story arc kind of progressed together until the Battle of Ingmiri that I mentioned previously, where we actually then had a year of downtime, and then our characters sort of developed separately for a little bit. Dylan's actually lost all his memories when he came back as a lycanthrope, and so that was like a whole interesting part as well. But Dutch sort of did his own thing where he went and stayed with this local orc tribe and sort of got back in touch with his orcish roots. Obviously, he didn't have much of that, did he? When he was
didn't have any
Xanthar.
When he went to Xanthar, so he had to learn the orc language, their customs, basically, because I imagine they're completely separate. Like the reference points are going to be off. The language is going to be so different that basically, he had to learn like a baby how to talk, and it's probably not fluent either.
But now, go back and listen to what episodes we've got on YouTube. But I think you'll see how Dutch and Dylan are thick as thieves, despite Dylan's sort of split personality. And excuse the pun there, but it was intentional. Rupert, why don't you tell us about Zook?
Yes.
Very different backgrounds to...
Yes. Had no idea who Dylan or Dutch were for a very long time. I dare say 200 years of his life. He grew up in the Aeocene forest.
So he's a gnome, right?
He's a
hence he's old.
Small forest gnome, about halfway through his life, maybe sort of 40 in human years. Grew up in the Aeocene forest, a forest of vast magical power. But he was ousted by a group of dwarven mercenary mercantile sort of a group, and he basically had to flee the forest. And he spent a few years sort of in turmoil, wandering around the forest, wondering what to do on the outskirts, until he stumbled upon a couple of brothers traveling with Waora Key. It was so
we met fairly early on, didn't we? The characters were sort of introduced gradually over the course of only a session, but Tashi sort of introduced us at various points along this sort of travel towards Ingmiri, and the brothers met Zook fairly quickly.
I think that's probably the best way of introducing characters as well, so everyone on the table gets a moment, as opposed to everyone being in the same room at the same time and just being like, go, and watch everyone try and RP over the top of each other.
Yeah, you need a moment, because that's what we took it in turns. Like the Xanthar brothers met Waora and carried along this caravan journey. Then we met Kofin, I think, and then a few weeks later along the road, I came into the picture. Then last, I think it was Rufus.
Right. So we've got No, sorry. Go ahead, man.
So Zook's like, So we met up. He got to know these guys. I was like, oh, actually, maybe they can show me like another way of living, a way to live somewhere else. So they introduced Zook to civilization. He starts getting
outside of your druidic ways.
Yeah, it was very confusing, but quite remarkable. He came round to it. He's completely unaware of how a city or a town might function. He's just living deep in this sort of woodland community. So we were adventuring for a while, and then eventually the party got round to going around the lake, and they were about to enter Thaldaral.
So there's where the campaign was initially set, it was sort of around this area where there was quite like vast lake. So Ingmiri was one of the towns, and the Great Lake, one of the towns and villages that lay upon its shores, essentially.
Our first season, if you will, of the campaign, our first year was adventuring around this lake, sort of discovering new places. And I basically did this, and then I went. I actually, in real life, went traveling for 4 months. So I had Zook. He escaped from a vast Shivra attack, leading them away from the rest of the party, and he actually found his way into the Feywild and spent some time there. He was not sure how long, but I came back from the Feywild as I returned from my 4-month trip away, and we went back to Umiri. And then the Battle of Umiri happened. And yeah, basically after this, Zook, they all then went back to the Aesine forest. So we took a trip to the Aesine because we thought we might find a way of returning Spera, who's Rufus's daughter, who we spoke. I think you guys spoke about Spera in the last week's stream.
Yeah, we did go into some detail. So if you're,
she was slayed.
I know there's probably we're mentioning a few things that might not make too much sense, but we're going to go into some sort of general topics shortly. So, but go back and listen to some of our podcasts or even some episodes on YouTube, and you'll sort of get a better feel for the world and the characters. So we've got Rupert, who's plays Zook, the gnome druid, Mike, he's our like bruiser of the group, half orc, barbarian, and myself playing Dylan Gray, who's the sort of sneaky rogue. So there's then we've also got a fighter and a paladin warlock. I'll give Tashi just a little bit of time. He's not feeling too good if you're just tuning in now. Tash is our GM. Maybe Tashi just want to sort of give us a little bit of background about the world, sort of just like, you wouldn't have to really go into much detail, but just like sort of give us an idea of what the world is like, just the sort of feel for it.
Sure. So I'm Tashi. I create the world in which these fantastic boys get to play around in. Definitely, I think each DM's got their own kind of style and how they how they choose to create stories or create this imaginary space. And I definitely didn't have a specific idea in terms of what the feel of it was gonna be exactly. And I don't think you necessarily will know that. I still don't really quite know what my own feel is. It's you guys that actually could probably tell me more about my style of DMing, or my maybe not the style of the mechanics, more like the style in terms of the environment and the description and that kind of, if it was a novel or if I wrote a book, what kind of book would it fit into? Obviously my campaigns aren't very like anime. Some people run their D&D like super anime style, like really high fantasy, people bombing down, crazy shit going off. I might throw in some flair and some bits like that
8-foot swords.
Yeah, like really over the top. It's definitely not very Final Fantasy. It's much more embedded in a kind of grim realism, I think.
Yeah, the way I would sort of describe it, it would be the day-to-day is this. You might imagine it being set in a time in history, sort of like it could be that, I don't know, medieval, maybe a bit later, that sort of era. However, it's still very much high fantasy. It's hard to escape that, it being D&D. So, but the average person might not have seen, even like a goblin or this sort of thing. Or there are these fantastical things that happen, but it's very much the ordinary person won't encounter it necessarily. Although, obviously, being a group of heroes, we tend to sort of bring the trouble wherever we go. So
that's right. I mean, you've seen more things, crazy things than any average dweller or citizen in my world will have.
But there are places like High Canopy, which... Oh, sorry, Rupert, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's designed to be organic and to feel organic. So that like you were saying, the little things are what come into play often, and it's designed to feel that every action you take will have a very like knock-on effect of the people that you have interacted with in a very normal way, but it enriches it because obviously you get all this high fantasy stuff, but also that peasant that you helped out might actually go back, have a really good day, raise their children really well or something, like have a, get really into their job.
You touched on that briefly, I remember last session, and I think as much as the players want to, have these butterfly effects or these like ripples that will kind of bounce out and bounce on other stuff and create some avalanche or some other story, that happens. You help the citizen here, and then later on you come back and he's made a life for himself. The town's prospering because of him or whatever it is. That's actually 100% down to the DM to make that a reality and to remember it and to like have this world as a fluid world. You could play and help out someone and it have absolutely no repercussions because your DM just forgets about who that person even was and or doesn't write it down or doesn't remember, doesn't care. And I think a long time of playing results in you remembering those things. And I think maybe because I've done it for so long, or maybe I'm naturally quite good at remembering the really small details of stories. And it's easier when you create them. But I often remember what you've done more than you remember what you've done.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I think so much of this comes with...
Otherwise no one knows what's going on.
So much of this comes with practice, like be it, becoming a better DM, or, knowing how to role play properly with your character, knowing how just mechanics work and that sort of thing. And like we've gone into some of those in the previous episodes, but to sort of bring it back to the subject that we're going to discuss,
yes,
with that time that you might put into a campaign, especially when you're playing the same character from week to week, there can be moments where you maybe don't feel super motivated about that character. You don't have that excitement when you first created that character might leave. And I can see Mike is shaking his head a little bit because I know that he's experienced this. And also you get the temptation to want to maybe write off your character or whatever that might be and start a new character.
For Dutch. I've written down deaths for Dutch.
I mean, without going in, Mike sends me a new character every other week.
I fucking love it's not so much I don't love Dutch as a character and everything he's become. I think it's fucking great. However, who here's played Skyrim, gone, oh, I'm gonna make a mage, and played a mage, and then you find a fucking legendary sword and you go, oh fuck. And then you go make a two-handed character, play through the game up until that point, get the sword, that's good. And then you find a bow, so you go, fuck, I'll make an archery character so I can get that legendary item. And then that's why I have like 18 characters on WoW, because each race I need the races on the different specs and stuff.
Yeah.
And I've only maxed a character once.
So for you, Mike, it's wanting to maybe like try out something new that kind of makes you want to drop your current character and move away. Rupert, what sort of things do you like? What sort of things make you sort of get to that point where you're feeling a bit stale with your character?
Well, I think for me, because I've gone straight druid, meaning I haven't multi-classed, I've only taken levels in druid. Sometimes that can feel like, am I just this generic, the idea of a druid that I made? I've become more of the class than I have my actual character.
Yeah.
And I sometimes I worry about that, and it's like it's trying to re-flavor the things that the druid gives you, but channeled into this, Zook, specifically Zook. Who is he? Like, he's not just a druid. He's a little gnome druid. He's mischievous. He's like, it's reminding yourselves of the little quirks, I think. But yeah, it can be. I think when you stuff like using the same spells all the time, like, just like, I cast Moonbeam, like I cast Moonbeam again, like it's a great spell. Getting over the kind of, this is mechanically the best spell, I'm always going to use it, because that will bore you. Like, You've got to branch out and say, I'm going to try that spell. It's shit, but I've never used it. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, you touched on reflavoring things.
Yeah.
And that's something Tashi has let me do immensely with Dutch, which is reflavoring his punch attacks. Because as a pugilist, it's meant to be a punch. And my weapons are obviously, Dutch's weapons are knuckle dusters. They're on his hands. But Tashi doesn't punish me for when I get excited going, I headbutt the giant. He doesn't go, well, technically your knuckle duster isn't on your head, so that's minus 1d8. Do you know what I mean? After like a super game, he's like, it's unarmed attacks. This is good. Fucking go for it. And it's being allowed to reflavor stuff that makes it fun.
Yeah, 100%.
So thinking back to that time when, you know, like you've, like I say, we've created our characters, and that honeymoon period starts to end. Do you remember sort of what you did to freshen up your character? Or, you know, it could just be little things you did, like maybe you invested yourself more in the role play, or like Dutch was saying, like, you know, you added some flavor to the things you do in combat.
Oh, yeah.
I know for me personally, like, you know, it can be the same. Like, I do actually have quite a few options to what I can do in combat. But what really makes those moments and what makes everyone get really excited is when I, or whoever, does a really awesome description, and yet for all intents and purposes they're just pulling back the bowstring and shooting an arrow.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all flavor.
It is. It's. I remember again. A lot of my examples are about spell casting because I'm a druid. But I remember started off the campaign being like, "Oh yeah, I like run forward and I cast like blight or something." And then I was like, shit, that was underwhelming. So I went through and I basically went through all the spells I regularly cast. And I was like, what? And I just sat down for like an hour and just thought, what's a cool way of describing this? And just wrote like a couple of pages of different ways to describe casting a spell. Lots of different things that Zook might have, like seed pods, maybe a little vial of water that could like spin and like crunch into an ice shard. And then like he throws it forward. And those things, although I don't use all of them, it gives you a sort of background of the things that you can draw upon to make your actions more interesting. And again, yeah, like it's so much more enjoyable for the rest of the party to hear that.
You doing that made me think of what items Dutch wanted to use for his scrying, and not being as being a bit more brutal in his spell components. Like Tashi let me say the gold worth is the same, but it's a different item entirely. It's not wood bits.
That was quite a good way for Dutch to sort of be a bit more, have some more elements to his character in a way, because although you can multi-class into a spellcaster, Tashi, and I was about to ask Tashi, like, what things does he do to encourage us to you know, like add, like, you know, more flavor, and also like essentially makes it more interesting for us to play. But, you know, like him giving the ability for you able to cast a few rudimentary spells gave Dutch so many more dimensions. He wasn't just this one-dimensional sort of brawler type character. He had these other things he could do. Like it was a connection with his god and Grumsh, and so on and so forth. Tashi, I don't know if you can think of anything else that you've sort of done in the past to encourage.
There's a ton.
Do you notice when someone's maybe not having the best time? Because that's how it can manifest sometimes, can't it? Someone is actually unmotivated to play the game and they're kind of not feeling it so much.
My kind of role as a DM is to try and facilitate the fun. Like, much as you guys can sit around and chat and like just RP out drinking and that kind of stupid shit, which is really fun. The kind of the world, it's down to me to make sure that everyone is kind of like actually enjoying what they're doing. So that sometimes it is mechanically with your character. So a good example of that is Mike ripping his eye out. I ended up giving him the same the same few spells that were just limited. You could only cast certain things once a day, in a kind of limited manner. The same as a one eye of Grumsh, which is like one of the orc shaman, which is a monster, like an NPC stat block. And I took those specific spells, so you suddenly got the cantrip guidance.
Fucking love guidance.
And you got a bless. And
augury.
And augury.
And you gave me a spiritual weapon, but I've learnt to never use it.
Yeah, there was spiritual weapon.
Fire.
But that it came at a cost of a it was a narrative thing that happened. It made sense, and it came at a massive cost to his character. It was kind of that you can give characters boons, but equally it should have some kind of ramification or some kind of curse. And the curse in this instance was something also narratively fun, cool. So it's a win-win, which it should be. The curse shouldn't be something, in my opinion, that the DM should give you that hinders your character in a way that it's going to make it less fun. It should challenge the player and kind of change it slightly, but it shouldn't necessarily destroy what they've created and
what the person wanted their character to be.
Yeah, right. So that was like the first instance of a real change. I implemented that. It wasn't a level. It was like a boon that you got. And I think you have to be careful as a DM handing that sort of thing out, because it is quite powerful. But because we're playing a game where we level up very slowly, it's a long game. And that causes players to be like, oh, well, is the fun? I want to level up and get my new stuff. You don't actually get that much leveling up. Like, you get a bit now and again, but really the really cool bits of leveling up might be a new ability or a new spell level. Those sort of bits are like I've unlocked 4th level spells now. Wow, there's so much choice. Yeah.
And that happens every third, fourth,
and every
level,
other level.
And so just leveling your players up isn't usually even a way to keep them engaged. And handing out these sort of things might aid in that, but it is ultimately down, I think, to the player themselves to be engaged with their character. You can only do so much. You're facilitating the fun. You can make it definitely more fun for them. You can create these narrative moments, but it's sort of down to them. And I can think of a few more examples. Your character, Theo, you actually approached me about, hey, I'd like to multi-class into Bloodhunter. Narratively, let's figure out how that could work. And you'd come up with this idea, and it ended up being a really pinnacle moment, and we tricked everyone else in the group because you died, but it was all...
I will say, I'll put my hands up. I'm a terrible player for this. I love to not like, I don't want to do one over on my fellow players, but I like having this big reveal or like this thing happen, and we've, like, me and Tashi orchestrated Dylan's death, and it was a cool moment. And I think it was just like, even like, for Dutch's character development, it was so wicked to watch. Like, it was so wicked when Dylan, like, it was sad. It was really sad, and like I was really upset at that moment when Dylan died. And Dutch and Mike and Dutch
together,
were
Mike Dutch.
Basically the fucking same.
He was quiet for me after this moment. It was really intense. Sorry, Tashi, I sort of
no. It's the passion of the moment, and we talked about, well, you talked about this last week. I listened, and the narrative moment that Mike got from that developed his character, and that's what can kind of keep the engagement. And your character changed. You actually died, although it was planned, so it wasn't really like a proper character. We talked about the death. Death is a good way of changing, obviously, your character. In the resurrection of it, Richter turning into a Gith, Rufus turning into a Forest Gnome, taking a level in something else. But alternatively, your impact to Dutch, Dutch, you came back onto the scene, and Dutch had already changed a lot when Brother Draug returned instead of Dylan. And that was downtime. So I gave you all a year of downtime, which was like, long period of time in D&D. Things move very quickly. You can go sessions and sessions, and it's only been a day. It's almost slower. Weirdly, in game goes slower than the real world. That's like
because you're not going to get
opposite.
a week of playtime in a week.
I know.
Unless you do the fast forward thing, your character
have to
will
implement downtime quite often.
Yeah.
And that downtime allowed you all to have that little character development. So, Dutch, you went off to kind of stay with the Orc tribe in the peaks, and you kind of learnt a bit more meditation. You learnt about why you pulled the eye from your head. You learnt about Grumsh, and you learnt about some of the other gods, which was cool.
Yeah.
Some of the other Orc gods, which kind of vibed with Dutch more than Grumsh. He didn't seem to enjoy Grumsh being there now that he was an eye of his. And I assume that engaged, kind of reinvigorated Dutch. It gave him a bit of a new personality flair, and that was mechanically. I mean, I'd given you those bits, but earlier.
I think Mike was saying at this point that he might want to come back with a new character. I remember.
Yeah, that was true.
And I think it was before Dylan's death. Before Dylan's death, you were like, I want to do a new character.
Because he was saying, I can't come back now. My brother's died. Like, I'm
Oh,
not.
of course,
back.
yeah.
I remember that.
I was like, he's gone to the Orcs. Like, he doesn't fucking want to go back there.
Yeah.
But you did, and it was so good.
Two times.
It worked well.
Things that have happened.
It would have worked well either way, but I'm pleased you stuck with it.
Dutch out the game.
Two backstory things.
2 Theo orchestrated things almost got Dutch.
But I feel I again, like, I'm terrible for doing this, but I do feel like it wouldn't be the same story without this happening. So what Mike's referring to is when so Dutch and Dylan, Dutch always believed that they were half brothers, but what had actually happened was Dylan was a bit older than Dutch believed him to be, because he's a half elf, so he ages a bit more slowly. So Dylan's dad was this famous adventurer, and when he was a younger, like sort of a teenager sort of age, he came and took him on one of his adventures, and they found this Orc tribe, and it basically resulted in his father killing Dutch's father, who Dutch was a babe at the time. And actually Dylan accidentally killed Dutch's mother, who thought that this tent was under attack by Dylan, and Dylan ended up taking this swaddling babe back to Xanthar City, who was Dutch, and then Dylan's mother brought up Dutch as her own, and they, he'd always said that they were half brothers, and there was this big reveal later in the campaign, and Dutch didn't speak to Dylan for quite a while.
I almost didn't want to speak to you.
It's cool because we were,
I think in that regard, that's something that's amazing for keeping engaged. Is don't always just look at what's happening now. Look at what has happened and change it if it makes sense to reintroduce something new to your character. Like the past is alterable. It's not set in stone if you haven't made it so.
Oh yeah, I would say 100%. And I'm going to touch on the thing that you mentioned in another one before, which is be careful doing things that are going to impact characters other than your own. Because man, like I was almost just like, Dutch is fucking done, man. He doesn't want to be.
It's a risky.
It's risky. Yeah.
Like Tashi convinced me to stay with Dutch because I was like, fuck this, man. Like Dutch is just going to kill all these motherfuckers. Like, I was like, Dutch could just kill them all. Might die, but yeah, fuck
But it made
yeah.
so much sense for Dylan's father that this
He's
was the
like-
true story. And it's I know it was shady at the time, but like it really shaped that. And I think, you know, for someone like yourself who does struggle with you know, staying committed to one character, because you have, like, you always come to be like, oh, I've got this idea for a D&D character, blah 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 blah, and like, oh well, yeah, you know, I might put Dutch down for a bit, but having this wealth of narrative experience with Dutch makes you want to continue playing him, because he's so dynamic. He's got always, when you bring in a new character, you don't have that.
Oh yeah, like Dutch has still got so much stuff he wants to do.
On that point, and I don't know if it's a question that maybe you had written, but do you think that there's a kind of wall that you have to get past in terms of staying engaged? Because I feel like at this point I'm so engaged with Zook, and I imagine that you guys are with your characters.
Becomes
that if
second
you
nature
get over the hump
almost to play that character. Easier. I think.
Yeah.
I can sometimes I don't know. I feel like after playing him for so long, sometimes Dutch leaks out into my personal life, which isn't okay.
I'm going to grapple more than anyone. I will say that.
Literally, like
Dutch and Mike are akin.
They're one in the same.
Mike is,
they're one in the same.
Mike is, you know, like one of. Like, I mean, he is my best friend. Like, and so are these guys. But there's a different. Me and Mike have a special kindred relationship, and our the way we play Dutch and Dylan is very much based off our real life relationship, and it's quite, you know, it's not something I think when this campaign eventually does come to an end, it's because we've committed to these characters. I think I'm gonna cry, like, I'm not even joking. Like, just thinking about it, really, I'm like, fuck, it's gonna be really intense.
With Critical Role, the second campaign finishing, and like I think we've been playing this campaign the same amount of time that they did, because we started around the same time when
but it was their full-time job, so they're able to be much more consistent. So we've had hiatuses longer than they, you know, even with COVID and stuff, taking that into account.
So I remember being like, oh, there's a new campaign that started, and we just started ours, and that's my time log in my head of when that
everyone was saying, listen to this thing, listen to it, and I was like, no, I don't want anyone else to play D&D, because I didn't want any, like, my first character with you guys, I couldn't think of the character voice, so I just settled on Arnie. Just like, I can't do accents. I was like, I know pretty much every fucking Arnie film line for line, so I'll just do his voice. And some sessions I didn't say shit unless I could use a line from a film, because I knew how to say that.
Is that Pit Slave?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's not mention the name of that character, because I feel like it's not appropriate.
He was basically a pit fighter.
He's a gladiator. He's a
gladiator, but just the actual name, and it was fine at the time. But Rupert, I'm conscious we haven't spoken too much about Zook, but I'd be really interested. You mentioned that point where you cross over and you're so into that. Do you remember when that happened with you and Zook?
Archdruid of Air, baby. 100%. As soon as that happened, and again, that wasn't something that was down to me.
When you reach that god tier level, but it's also it's not just the power that comes with it, but it's just
a whole facet of the character that is introduced that you'd never planned before, and that you can walk into. It's like a second chapter. It's like, okay, Zook was just some little squirt thing that didn't really have much power. He was a druid. He could do some cool, crazy shit, but that was mainly down to the fact he was from this deep magical forest, and he was just a little, you know, he was the party equivalent of like a goblin. He was just some little guy, and then getting that responsibility. It's not just the power that comes with it. It is the responsibility. It's the role that he then had. He had to meet up with these other archdruids. His role is to maintain the balance in the Aesine forest and further afield if need be, and also because he was the archdruid of air, it reflavored my spells, the way I interacted with the world, any creatures that I interacted that were airborne, summoning. I've now created some players out there might know of a spell where you conjure animals. It's called conjure animals. So I created rather than choosing the animals I choose to create, I created some roll charts where I roll a d100 and that tells me what creatures appear. So I'd done this for a while, but when I became the Archduke of Air, I was like, okay, that's cool. And then it was only actually recently that I've now adjusted it so it's like statistically more likely to summon a flying creature. So they'll have a 20% chance, whereas other creatures.
That's really cool. How you can sort of incorporate that.
I didn't know that. Awesome.
Narrative side of your, it's narrative, but it's mechanical at the same time. I really like that.
Yeah. So that's something that an element of the campaign that I didn't choose that has now affected the way that I play and just has got me on this kind of like take off. Like I fucking love the character. He's awesome.
If I had to think of a section where I was like, ooh, so now it's Rupert's time, Zook's time, because I often do that. I'll kind of almost circulate between characters having their kind of moment. Partly that's been due to kind of arcs where you've gone back and you've done your backstory sections. You've kind of gone to places. You went to the Aeocene was being obviously Rupert and Zook's one. You went to Varamark, which was Richter and his sort of home, as well as maybe a bit of Varian, although he had to leave and that part of the thing never kind of happened. And then you went to Soul Reach, and there was the whole arc kind of with Ruthus. And this is kind of only recently, really, that's all happened. It's in this kind of later stage of the game, in the 10th level and up, that this has happened. And for player engagement, I think that's, your backstory, you're doing the thing, or all these things that you wrote before are coming up in new ways, and the DM's taken it and they've run with it and they're doing all this stuff. And obviously that's super interesting for you. For example, when you're in the Aeocene, Zook, it's your place. You're kind of like the main person in that, you're the main character for that moment, for that bit. But it's making sure you're keeping the other players engaged while that's happening. So while Zook's getting his Archdruid of Air, he's now the boss of High Canopy. How do you add in? I'm saying as a DM because I can only really add in my bits as what can a DM do. How those bits where you keep other players engaged. So how do the other players kind of integrate in that? What role do they play in that? So, for example, I designed sections. I'll design sections with people in mind. For maybe it's what their skills are made for, maybe it's their lineage, maybe it's something I just know they're going to want to do. For example, the orcs, Gomaku, and the jungle orcs arriving, and Dutch having that moment where
Tashi's like, Dutch, something to do, grapple a gorilla. Fucking amazing.
Well, he took you up to the top of High Canopy and made you jump off it as part of like the orc ritual thing. And I had a bit where obviously Ruthus was reincarnated, and he has now a connection with the tree too. So there was a kind of bit with him in the tree, and he kind of was in the pool with the lilies, and
you had Purnima turn up.
I had Purnima turn up, which was which was an element of backstory for you, Theo, for Dylan. And Richter had his kind of kobold bit where he had his Paladin of Redemption moment.
To do something.
I didn't plan that kobold bit for Richter though.
But that's such an interesting like sort of point, really. You so when you're playing and you're feeling like maybe you haven't been in the limelight for that long, or like not much has happened with your character. I always remember that hopefully if your DM's a good DM, they're always going to introduce something for you later down the road. But also don't be afraid to do stuff, be active, be an active participant in the campaign. So like that's a great example of Richter. Like there was not much going on for Richter at that point. But Aidan being Aidan, he engaged Richter into the story, but with this and it was such a great light relief. He because he's had serious moments in other parts of the campaign, but right there he was this sort of comic relief at that point where things were, very serious and we were dealing with these world-changing issues.
Because he was so out of place to the
exactly.
environment.
So now although it's great when you're in the limelight, it's also my favorite part of it now is, and we just had this whole Soul Witch bit. I loved sitting back and just watching the others, specifically Rufus in this, do their thing. And there was some amazing moments between Rufus and characters from his backstory, so Tashi playing them. And I was happy just to sit there. I didn't care that I wasn't doing anything. That was so much part of the game for me that's so much part of the game for me now. And I think that just comes with the experience of playing it.
Like, honestly,
Sorry?
I could listen to Aiden talk shit all day long.
Yeah.
I get way too carried away wanting to.
I wanted to play as various kobolds or oh yes, Master Victor. I'll shine your boots.
I like playing. I like playing silly, fun characters because you guys,
the
you
goblins.
guys fucking lose your shit when I do characters like that.
Yeah,
it's the best.
I don't have to even say
I remember
much.
so really early on with the goblin doing the bow. It's like thinks he's going to get hit by a sword, and then it's like, no, you missed.
It was the classic. He's like.
Yeah, that's it. You just did it so well.
Because I think you shot a firebolt at a goblin one time and it missed him, and I acted as the goblin going like, and then pulling his bow.
It's just every goblin we encountered did the same face.
Yeah.
So
it was. Oh, I miss goblins, man.
I'm gonna keep it a little bit shorter tonight, and I think this is like a really great place to end. And I just sort of wanted the last thing that I sort of thought might be like just a good place to sort of wrap up was just like when you've been playing for the amount of years that we have, it's like it becomes easy just to stick with the same character because you're at this point you're along for the ride, and it becomes so much more than just your own character. You're enjoying being part of the world, listening to all these amazing stories. But like I can't think of anything like if I had a choice. I was, listening to a podcast, like, doing work or whatever, it would just be stuff from my campaign and my friends, listening to my friends do it, because that's how invested I am in it. It's just more than my character now. And, you can do lots of the tips that we've suggested that you might try out for your own character. But at the end of the day, like if you invest yourself in the campaign with your friends, then that can be enough.
You can get to a point that we are now, looking back, being nostalgic about something that happened 3 years ago. It's the history of your character that you've created for a very long time makes it worth sticking with.
It's the shared history, though. That's
exactly.
It's the
shared experience.
History. No one else understands those moments like we do. I mean, they were ones that were before the podcast. But potentially people who, if they've listened to all of the podcasts, watched all our shows, they're going to be along with, they're there with us. Like they are.
That's why we wanted to, and like, we might find out, years down the line that actually we were shit and like people hated what we did. but at the end of the day, we thought perhaps we wanted to share this story. We wanted to share this, like, because not everyone, and it makes me sad to think that some people don't have the opportunity to be able to get together in a group like this and have these regularly scheduled experiences, and because it's so awesome. But we're fortunate enough, and we thought, well, let's sort of give it a go and see if other people might be interested in coming along for the ride. And eventually we're going to get to a point where we end this campaign and we're going to start a new campaign. And as much as I'm so invested in this campaign and these characters, and it's going to be so sad to see that end, also equally excited for when we eventually start afresh and we can document that happening, and hopefully, you know, we've got a few other people along for the rides, because I think that'd be really sick.
Yeah, I'm terrified of starting a new campaign because that means I have to learn a new voice.
That's where we end.
You can do Welsh. You can do a good Welsh. I've heard it.
Yes. Yeah.
I've noticed I've never put Welsh into the game because I can't do it. Rupert, you can do a really good Welsh as well.
I used to be able to when I watched more Gavin and Stacey.
Yeah, it was all Gavin. Gavin. I have to really think about it, and when I'm being a character, I don't want to have to think.
Fireball.
All you need to do to speak Welsh is you start with one word first. Dildo.
And with that, thank you for watching.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks. Next week we should probably just do a quick announcement, just because things might be changing up a little bit.
Next week, we've been a bit on and off with our timetable lately. I mean, due to me being ill and stuff. But next week we might not be doing a session, our normal session either. But we shall be on probably for a chat. Hopefully, maybe on Thursday. With James Gifford. He said he's free.
James Gifford.
So we'll see.
I won't be here because I've got some holiday. I've got to go and spend some time with my old man. Because I'm, you know, and my brother who lives quite a while away. So you know, some family time calls. Yeah. But I'm really gutted to be missing that because it's going to be awesome. Because James Gifford is an incredible DM, incredible player all round.
Yeah. Are we doing a one-shot next Thursday, or are we doing a chat next Thursday?
Oh, good point. We'll see. If I can think of a fun one-shot, we'll do that.
If we do a one-shot,
there'll be something to watch.
On Tuesday, why don't we talk about making new characters? And then the people who join can use that session just to make characters for the one-shot.
Interesting idea. I like it.
And if anyone joins in the chat, I'll let them decide my character.
Oh,
I will. I mean, someone's going to take over the social media side of things, so they can update people that way. I mean, it's right now. It says 3 people are watching, so one of them's me. So I don't actually know who's watching. so we'll see. But like, you know,
Commander Root,
this fame,
Commander Root, we salute you. I don't know if you're a real person. You've never once.
I reckon it's a bot. Come on,
he's trying.
Yeah, he's
Dinner's in the chat.
Yeah.
Dinner's in the chat.
But you know, maybe this will be a sort of a backlog of things that people can go and watch if they're interested. I don't know. Yeah. We do this because we love this. We're going to do it if there's one person watching or you know, thousands.
It's fun for us.
Thousands. Like,
if you're watching this 2 years in the future and we're really famous, pay me.
Okay, so we've had our first message in the chat for the set thing, and it's from none other than Josh, Ruther Suncrest. Mike has to play an old crone.
I'll play a swamp crone. I'm down.
Oh, swamp crone. Yeah.
Crone. That would be great. Right. See you later, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.